welcome everyone to this wonderful evening. I have a fire going in the other room, and I think that this is a beautiful night to actually share with each other. It looks like we have about 50 people on the call, and it's beautiful. It's intimate for Zoom. My name is Lisa Cacari-Stone, and this evening is one of 3-part series dedicated to racial healing, shared lessons, social justice and health equity in New Mexico. The first part series we had was a talk from Dr. Zinzi Bailey on structural racism in June. The second part we had with Dr. Braveheart, who's on the call with us, and Ryan Sanchez and Dr. Begay, who spoke about microaggressions, resiliency and healing, and historical trauma. And this third series is tending to the fires of healing together. And what can we learn from each other? What can we share with each other at this time on September 11th? I have the pleasure to introduce, I just want to, let me share my screen very quickly, is our 3 speakers tonight. And I want to thank the TREE Center. We have a National Research Center of Excellence funded by the National Institutes of Minority Health Disparities. Our work is dedicated to training the next generation, to making a difference on the needle in terms of building the workforce of scholars of color, working with communities of color. We also are testing interventions. We're not just describing the problem, but looking for solutions together. That's what our Transdisciplinary Research Center does. And I'm looking in the crowd here who's on. I know Dr. Braveheart, she's a co-PI with me. And I'll talk briefly about some of our consultants. And I want to also thank our College of Population Health, Dean Tracy Collins, who's joined us. Welcome, Tracy Collins. And they co-sponsored this event tonight. And of course, our college is looking at making a difference as well in advancing health equity in our state. I have the pleasure to introduce 5 amazing human beings who will be your guest hosts tonight, the speakers. I first want to start with Kiran Katira here. She's with the TREE Center, and Kiran has had many years of dedication in terms of her work on racial justice in New Mexico. One of the passions that Kiran has been in terms of working with young people and engaging with young people to have them advocate for the issues that are important to them. And I think that Kiran has also been in the weeds with healing with our Community Engagement Center at the University of New Mexico. And Kiran has also, she's a certified trainer with the People's Institute on undoing racial injustices. One of the first speakers we have tonight, and I'm just going to speak from my heart about their bios. Nadine Tafoya has her own consulting business, Tafoya and Associates. She has been a mover and a shaker, and many of us trust Nadine for her work in behavioral health in New Mexico. She's engaged with many communities, both nationally and internationally, and has had many SAMHSA grants. Nadine is also known and trusted for her work doing evaluation. Nadine has been working closely with our Disparity Center and the TREE Center for many years. And I just want to thank her and appreciate her for joining us tonight. She's also a wife, mother, and grandmother. She's from the Mescalero Apache tribe and lives in a Pueblo village in Santa Clara with her family. Second, I want to welcome and thank another teacher and mentor and someone I trust is Dr. Wanda Cody Padilla. Dr. Cody Ross Padilla has been an elder for many years, and I met Wanda years ago when I first moved to New Mexico in 1990 or 89. There was a W.K. Kellogg funded Institute for Intercultural Healing. And Wanda and Nadine and Roberto, as well as Lucy, were engaged with that. Wanda has been a teacher to many, and I want to just mention some of her many, many accomplishments besides being a mother and grandmother. She's working on her fourth book, Reconciliation Type, Solution to the Color Line Problem. She is a certified facilitator and intercultural diversity trainer. Wanda is very trusted, serves on the board of New Mexico Voices, and has been a dear sister and elder with our Tree Center along with Nadine. Roberto Chene is what we call a tesoro, a treasure of New Mexico in his dedicated work with the Kellogg Foundation, but also as the director for the Intercultural Leadership Training and Conflict Resolution. Many of us have gone to Roberto when we've wanted to explore difficult topics around healing organizations. I know I started working with Roberto back in the 90s when he came as a consultant to the Department of Health along with Nadine, was trying to help us work out intercultural relationships there. And I think that Roberto is known by many for his cross-cultural education, his passion to Latinos in public policy. Last but not least, Lucy Moore. I first met Lucy and had heard about her in the phenomenal work she was doing on environmental justice in New Mexico. She's a facilitator, mediator, trainer, and consultant. She has really been involved and in the weeds, like our three other thought leaders tonight, in dealing with the most difficult issues and conflicts we have in New Mexico. For 35 years, she's worked regionally and nationally. I welcome all four of these, and I leave it to Kiran, who will be our facilitator tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa has a beautiful way of setting the stage so that we're all ready to engage in a conversation. And I'm so honored to be here with such phenomenal leaders, and not just the four on the panel, Lisa, and all of the people I see. I'm looking at who's in the room, right? The Zoom room. And we have a lot of people with great insights. And I just wanted to say that if you have comments or chat questions, we have the chat box there for us to add things. And we also will have time for the panelists to have a discussion and conversation with each other, and really talk to each other and give us some beautiful insights on how they're making sense of what's going on in the world right now. But I want to set the stage in terms of the times we're in, right? So I've had since 1988, I've been working on undoing racism, and it started in England, where I was raised, but I'm actually Indian, Afghani roots, and raised in England. But 25 years in New Mexico has taught me so much about the uniqueness of our state and how much we have to really take those global national lessons and actually make them localized for us here. And so I've had great mentors along the way. And I consider Roberto a mentor, teacher of mine. And so I'm grateful to be in this space with him. But September 11th as well, right? So the day we're in really makes me think about my heritage and my culture and what it was like to be sitting in the US when that happened, and how it reminded me of how us as Asians are forever foreigner in this country. It took a split second and we were treated as other and put in this category of fear, that people feared us and we were marginalized just like that, family members and others. And it really reminded me of how fragile our acceptance is in this country at any given time. And it also taught me about how little history people have of different countries and different peoples, and even the people here, right? And it really brought to my attention how this work that we're all involved in, you're here because this is your life's work as well, the people in this room. This is work that not only needs to be done, but has to be done so we humanize each other and we reconnect with each other in ways that brings greater understanding and helps us move forward to better all our consciousness, right? And then I think about the times we're in this country right now. And I have the honor of learning from civil rights leaders in the People's Institute. And these are elders who have taught me how the times we are seeing right now are not new to the US, but also how all of this was laying there, right? And happening on a constant basis. And now we're getting to see it in a collective way. So it's really bringing to our attention as a mass how America is, right? And so it's making us face it, and it's making us rethink things, and it's bringing so many of us together to try and figure out how we, in this time of hate and, you know, seeing people murdered on the streets, is actually something that can only change if we come together. And I'm talking cross-racially. That's the kind of work I'm interested in, is working across racial lines, across intergenerations, interdisciplinary, and intersectionality is key to all of that. So given all of that, I want to say that this conversation, thankfully, is one of many. And this is a series of conversations that are going to happen. So such an honor to have these wise people in our mix to share their insights. And I wanted the four panelists to also add a few words, if they would, about the context that we're in. It's September 11th, and it's a time of uprisings all over the US and of a lot of violence as well from institutions. And that institutional violence has been happening on a constant basis in the US. So any thoughts that you want to share as we open?
I would like to start with a thought. I have to mention that it has been 19 years on September 11th that Maria Braveheart and Roberto and Wanda, we all shared some time together at the Tamaya resort, where we were hosting a SAMHSA conference. It was a national conference on historical trauma with partners from across the globe who came together for a week, for 5 days, to talk about our history and our history and our traumatic experiences that we've shared with our people. And it was, you know, this was like the second of the historical trauma conferences that we hosted. And it was just a magical time to have all these different people from across the globe, Africans from Africa, Asians, Hispanic, Native people from Canada and Mexico. And we talked for 5 days about our histories and the traumatic experiences we have endured. And so Maria and I, we always get together, we say, you know, we meet, we talk, we remember those days where we were starting to do this work nationally and locally. And I just had to make a comment about remembering that conference and how it brought us all together.
I would like to just offer a very personal memory from 9/11. That evening, when we were all in total shock, my husband said out of the blue, I think I'll go get an ice cream bar. I don't think he'd ever said that in his life. We had at the time a small store, grocery store and gas station nearby. We live outside Santa Fe. And it was owned by East Indian family with turbans. And so he went off to go get an ice cream bar. He went to support them, and he said he went to be sure that they were all right. And when he came back, I said, "What took you so long?" And he said, "It was so crowded. Everybody was there, and they were all there to support that family." So I myself like to pick that little nugget out of that experience, out of that horrible day, knowing that there were thousands and thousands of moments like that out there too.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Right. Wanda, if you want to unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, the thing I want to say, which is very synchronicity, the synchronicity of me being the president of the Santa Fe branch of the NAACP in year 2001. August 9th, exactly a month before this big 9/11 happened, we had a benefit when Marianne Williamson, who was a presidential candidate, as you know, had written a book called The Healing of America. And I used to read parts of that book at our meetings, and she became a friend of mine. I invited her August 9th, a month before the bombing of our World Trade Center. And I find that very auspicious. The marquee on the Lindsay Theater said, Marianne Williamson, The Healing of America, a benefit for the Santa Fe branch of the NAACP. And exactly 1 month later, we had the thing that has changed our history. And this is a very auspicious day.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
I'd like to picking up on this context, and it's a great pleasure listening to the reflections on this. I can't help but conflate in a way 9/11 and the pandemic, and I think because I got triggered when Kiran, when you were talking in terms of the aftermath and the consequence, thinking mostly about the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. And how on a monumental level with 9/11 and now with the pandemic, and I just want to focus just on the government part, because I think the healing and the caring and the incredible humanity of the population is a different reality. But the government so lost incredible opportunities for world change and world healing in both instances, at least up to now with the pandemic and certainly with 9/11, that it took what could have been a world healing monumental catastrophe and totally changed life on earth if it wanted to, if it had the will and the understanding. So the incapacity of this government, I think, is like, when we're talking about racial justice and healing, I guess it's hard to find words to say how lacking it is. Mm-hmm. How much work we have to do. Mm-hmm. One could grieve at the lost opportunity in both instances, and I think that's what I'm thinking about as we get into this conversation.
You're so right. You're so right. And I think it makes me realize how, and I could hear it in all of your memories of looking for the hope, right? And looking for that optimism and looking for what could have happened and what should happen, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you're all four people that face reality, but you look and you problem solve for ways out of it, right? In various ways, right? And so I would love for you to share some of the journey that it took for you to be able to face reality, but then still think about what could be, right? So how did you come to where you are right now? And any one of you can pick up on that.
Well, I don't mind starting. I'm speaking from the perspective of being raised in the Jim Crow South, which was segregated apartheid. It turned out to be the greatest gift that I could have had, being raised in that segregated community where I was not faced day to day with the slights and indignities of being treated less than. So I had a very strong self-concept, raised in a community, surrounded by a supported family, a church, all of that. I got into the real world, and I'm going to speak very quickly because, of course, how I got here is I wrote a book about it actually. But when I left home was when I found out what was going on in this country. It was in the 60s, and this is where the riots were breaking out. This brought me to what I call my anger years, when I discovered that I wasn't loved by everybody. This was a world that didn't like me because of my color of my skin after I left my protective environment. And long story short, in Miami, Florida, I happened to meet Muhammad Ali, and he became a brother of mine actually, and I became a Black Muslim. And I was going through the anger years so much because I knew nothing about my past, nothing about my history. I didn't even know my name. So as a Black Muslim, nothing to do with religion. It was a nationalistic thing to do. I became Wanda X for 5 years. During that time, I learned so much about my history. The thing that brought me away from the Black Muslim movement is because we were taught that Black people, just like the white supremacists, we were taught that we were the superior people, okay? And whites were blue-eyed devils. That was into my head. And my Christian teachings clicked in, and I could no longer go for that kind of a movement. And so we left the movement because I was raised with love in my heart for everyone. Believe it or not, I left the Muslims and went to become a Baha'i. You know about the Baha'is. This is a form of Islam, but it's about love and unity. So I had the two extremes. So I got a balance about where I was, which is to love people and to get back to my roots. So I went to study to get my degrees in counseling. And this is when I learned about self-actualization and becoming a fully functioning person. And I knew I wanted to be that kind of a person. But all around me in the 60s, all hell was breaking loose. And I still, the most harmful thing that happened to me when I left my protective home was the feeling of internal oppression. And then I discovered really I was being oppressed externally. So I went to graduate school to learn all about how to be a fully functioning person. I learned about cognitive behavior therapy. I learned about racism, and I went to India. I became a meditator. The foundation of my life became spirituality, and that moved me more into the feeling of love for all people and what could I do to make people love each other the way I was raised. And a story that stuck with me was with Andrew Young, who was the ambassador to the UN for our government. He told the story that he was in a hotel dressed to go play golf, and a white woman came up to him and gave him her car keys to go get a car. And people asked him, well, how do you put up with those slights and indignities? And Andrew said, you know, racism is a sickness, and I refuse to get angry with sick people. So that stuck with me, and that helped me to get over it. So I began to study more, and I learned through my ordination as a metaphysical minister, skills and tools. And I wrote about all of this in my book. And to get over it, we have to do our personal work. And my favorite teacher was Lillian Robel Rose, and her word to us, do your personal work. I found out what my personal work is to know myself, to love myself. And I studied pranic healing. I learned about superbrain yoga. I went to India. I learned to meditate. This is what we have to do as individuals to reach a critical mass of love, to change ourselves first. And as Gandhi said, be the peace that we want to see in this world. So to the world, I would say, study yourself, love yourself, pray. Praying is a feeling. It's not just words. You got to feel that love in your heart and meditate. These are the tools that I write about. This is what I teach when I do holistic counseling. And this is what's going to have the tipping point for us to go into what we need to heal in this country. And Marianne Williamson said to me, this country has to atone for all of the atrocious things that's been done to Native American people and the way Black people were treated. And that atonement has not happened. The reconciliation hasn't happened. But I have hope as each of us do our personal work, as we go into this planetary shift of a new era, that people are waking up. We almost at the tipping point. So I have hope that we will get to that point where people have done the personal work so that we can change not only this country, but we can change the world. And that's why we're on this planet now. And there's so much more to my story. And then it's in the books that I write. So that's all I'm going to say right now.
Thank you, Wanda. You made me sit up in my chair. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, I could go next, mostly because and try and because I've been thinking of what pieces I might put together and keep it relatively brief.
It's hard.
And maybe to the point. Yeah, it's hard. But I decided to go next because Wanda mentioned Lillian Rabal Rose, who's also a dear friend of mine, and influenced me, and with whom she and I and others. I'm kind of starting later than when my journey began, but Lillian and myself and others spent years in working in mental health counseling, a particular model of that, reevaluation counseling. We had many what we call liberation workshops and ally building workshops where we just, in people of color workshops, white caucuses, mixed workshops, we processed the internalized and the externalized aspects of racism and oppression. And basically through the whole process of personal growth and working it out with each other, basically learned the practice and the theory at the same time, just experientially. And that really initiated all of us into, I think, speaking for myself and for Lillian too, and I think she's, I haven't talked to her lately, she was having some health issues, and I think retired, but that experience of working it out together and liberating ourselves in a personal level from the internalized pain of racism and oppression, I think started us on a path to do that for each other and for others. And I think many of us found different ways in different careers to actually do the same thing, whatever we might call it. It's all about trying to cut through the challenge of structural oppression and help human beings stay human, including keeping ourselves human. So that's been a big part of my journey. And I started out, again, just to say briefly, I started out as one of my earliest memories was as a small second grade Chicano kid being punished in Catholic school for speaking Spanish, not realizing at the time what was going on with that. But I felt it in my body, and then I started to not like school after that experience. And it's been basically a framing experience in my whole life, because I think I've spent actually all these many years, as old as I am, trying to understand and integrate that into the reality and what causes that, and how could good people, because I think, when we get into oppression, it's easy to ascribe all kinds of awful motives. Sometimes it's just good people doing normal things. And when we talk about healing, I think we need to keep that kind of reality in mind. In any case, one thing led to another, and that framing experience for me, as I grew, I eventually went to study to be a Catholic priest. But in that, I didn't stay that. But the many years I studied theology, philosophy, sociology, etc., I really understood the essence of human community from that experience. And accompanied with that experience was being part of the Chicano movement. I was part of the movement in any case, but in a particular formulation with other Chicano priests and seminarians working for racial justice and believing that the Catholic Church was, and the essence of the message was to do social justice. It's kind of another issue in how many so-called Christian manifestations today, in my view, have totally lost their way in terms of healing and what racial justice is about. But in any case, I ended up eventually in mental health work. And mental health work was based on understanding that human beings are great, human beings are fine. If you just quit oppressing them, then just leave them alone, they might just be okay. So our form of therapy had to do with understanding the external and internalized effects of racism, sexism, etc., structural oppression. And to further understand that, I got into two other forms of practice beyond mental health, or as part of mental health, I should say. I went to Brandeis and did postdoctoral work and in social welfare policy. And my goal there was to learn from my perspective and to pay attention to my teachers and to the readings, but I wanted to think about what would intercultural inclusive social policy look like? And what do you need to learn and do in order to create something like that? Mm-hmm. That was my particular take on the Haller School of Social Policy. And I think that made a tremendous difference to me. I think some of my key professors were longtime leftists who had really processed out and deconstructed and understood structural oppression. And I learned a lot from them. So eventually, I combined all of this with conflict resolution and came to see that putting all the pieces together, two things I think motivated me finally. One is, I think I got into this type of activity because at some level, it was about my own healing, trying to understand what I had gone through and name it, because for years I couldn't name actually what I had gone through, not only as a child, but later on. And also, what does it take? And I asked the question of New Mexico as a New Mexican, looking past the tricultural myth of tourism at the time. What does it really take to bring people of diverse realities together? But not only that, keep them together. What is the skill set and the knowledge base that we need to reconcile and heal the conflict around diversity and sustain that unity to actually create new policy? So those are the underlying questions that I've asked and tried to figure out.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll go next.
Thanks, Nadine.
I would like to just sort of briefly talk about the way that I grew up as a Native person, as a Mescalero Apache woman. And I was pretty sheltered growing up on the Mescalero Reservation, a beautiful mountainous environment, and where there was a lot of freedom to roam the mountains, ride horses, fish in the free-flowing creeks and rivers on the reservation. So as a small child, I grew up in this very insulated environment. And my father and my grandfather were leaders in the tribe, and they were helpers of the tribal people. They went out and they helped build homes for our neighbors. They built barns and schools, and they were always of service to the community. So that was my foundation, that I learned that to be successful, to be happy and healthy, you had to give back to the community. And then my father decided to become an ordained minister, so we moved to Texas so he could finish his schooling. And that's when I began to feel racism as I entered the school system. And as my education progressed, I began to feel invisible, that my voice wasn't heard. And I began to feel that I was different than others in the classroom. And so that went along with a lot of experiences that were not so good and not so happy compared to the environment that I had just left. So as I got into high school, of course, I began to move into more activism and became part of the American Indian movement and wanted to really have a voice in what's happened to our people, and began to shout from the rooftops that, you know, if people, the public wasn't going to hear my voice, then I'm going to raise my voice and I'm going to raise my fist. And I remember winning a speech contest in high school, and I was the only person who gave a speech on the occupation of Alcatraz. And the title of my speech was "Better Red Than Dead," which was a term during the 60s.
Yeah.
And so when I got into college, you know, I began to notice that I had a gift for making space for others who were voiceless. And I got into the profession of social work, and it was perfect for me because it allowed me to advocate for children, for families, and those who were facing addiction and other kinds of behavioral problems. So through that voice, through that experience, my social work journey helped me to then get into not only providing therapeutic services to families and children, but then move into policy development with the state government, and then began to do a lot of training and providing knowledge of what I was learning to tribal communities. And so that's been the journey to work on decolonization in New Mexico, and how do we decolonize the existing systems, and how do we provide spaces for those who don't have the avenues to access resources. And so that has taken me, you know, across the country to talk about it, and has really helped me to begin to realize what I needed to do as an individual who has the experience, as the individual who's had the opportunities, and how can I provide this kind of leadership and give back to the communities that I live in and that I work with every day.
Thank you, Nadine. Lucy, would you like to add?
Yes, thank you. Oh, this is so much fun to hear from my dear friends and colleagues. It's really, really great. So I grew up in Seattle in a middle-class white neighborhood with all the privileges that come with that simple statement. And went to college, got a bachelor's degree. I realize I'm the only one on the panel without a graduate degree. But I did my graduate work in Chinle, Arizona. After college, I went to work on the Navajo reservation. That was really an incredible learning experience for me. I went as a naive, idealistic white woman, ready to save the Navajos, and quickly learned that, number one, they didn't need saving, and they certainly weren't interested in me saving them. So that was the first lesson. And I lived in a town that was maybe 1% not Navajo. So I learned, we stayed there almost 8 years, and I really learned what it felt like to be a minority as a white person. I'm not pretending I had the experiences of a minority, but I know what that feels like to not look like anybody else, and not speak the language, not have the same history, the same sense of humor, the same religious beliefs, everything. And in that process, it was really important for me to come to grips with that. And I went through some pretty ugly periods of just thinking that I could be Navajo, that, you know, if I just tried hard enough, that one day I would get to be Navajo too. And I imagine that that's an experience that minorities feel. And eventually, with the help of a lot of Navajo friends, I came to see that it's perfectly fine for me to be white. The last thing they wanted was for me to wish I were Navajo. It just was all screwy. And I settled down and had an amazing experience there. Dear friends that I visit with frequently, even from Santa Fe, where I am now. So that experience, along with just living in a place that was so oppressed by the US government, unbelievable discrimination isn't even the word for it, in terms of education, health, economy, every imaginable way. I was Justice of the Peace. I ran for JP and got elected and ended up registering hundreds of Navajo voters that had never been registered. Nobody had ever bothered to go onto the reservation and register people who had every right to vote. So I woke up politically in that way as well. When we moved to Santa Fe, I think I'd like to just focus on one other really important learning experience. And that was, I went to work for a nonprofit, Western Network, and we were lucky enough and privileged enough to be able to get big foundation grants from the Ford Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, and we began to do good work in northern New Mexico in communities, helping with dialogues about water rights, bringing the state agency and a tribe together, et cetera. And we began to get big blowback. Who do you think you are? You're white carpetbaggers. You just move into the state. You've got these connections. You've got all this money. You're the ones making the money. You think we need this help from you. We don't. Who asked you to come and do this work for us? Why don't you just give us the money instead of getting the money for yourselves? Harsh, harsh lessons with more than a kernel of truth. So that really helped open my eyes about the reality, the history, what northern New Mexico was all about. And then meeting Roberto, working with him, you know, we've known each other, I don't know, 30 years at least, and Nadine and Wanda, and just continuing to have that really great education from people like that. I think I don't want to take more time.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, everyone. And you can hear the threads between their stories, right? And so much there about how the work is internal as well as external. And the lessons come from mentors and from rough experiences, right? So whether it's from those childhood experiences or it's along the way when you're trying to do good, but you're actually not, right? And so how those lessons come and they're gifts, right? And how we should be of service to each other. And that is part of what it means to be human. And how to do this work in a way that's taking on the systems of oppression, but also realizing in the process, we shouldn't be dehumanizing ourselves, right? And becoming cold to the world. So many of you have that social work, counseling, spirituality kind of background that keeps us there. And one thing I would love to pick up on is that so many of you talked about what it means to be in New Mexico, right? And the stories and the skills you learn along the way. So any one of you want to jump in and share a little bit more about what it means to be in New Mexico, work in New Mexico, and what kinds of skills it takes to do the undoing racism work in particular?
Well, I can share some of my experiences. I feel blessed to have been in the kind of work that I was in for many, many years, because I understood the issues and the problems of the Native community here in New Mexico, very similar to African Americans, how you feel dehumanized, you're invisible, you don't have a voice because of who you are. And I had such respect for the Native people, the fact that they were in their own areas and they were sticking to the traditions and learning the language. And I envied that. I said, my God, I wish I had what they had.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to go back to the ancestors, and when they would introduce themselves, my tribe, my clan, I said, I don't know a damn thing about mine. And I admired them so much, and I had such respect. And I met up with this lady, Nadine, at the Institute for Intercultural Community Leadership, where we've been together for many, many years. And of course, Roberto and Lisa and Lucy, we've been around the block with this. And I remember Nadine was part of a group, Civil Institute for Women of Color. And Nadine represented the Native American women, and she did it so well. The strength and the resiliency. So I feel blessed to have moved to New Mexico and to have had the blessing and opportunity to work with the Native people here. And not only the Native people, but my own people, African Americans, because with the Office of African American Affairs, I was on the board, and I was president of the Santa Fe NAACP, and just to be of service and what I've learned. So being in New Mexico and seeing the trials and tribulations and doing what I could to help has been a personal blessing for me, because I understood the problem so well. And I just admired the Native people for the resiliency and the fact that they're hanging on to the traditions and the culture. And I have part in helping them, hopefully with some trainings. Right, Nadine? Hopefully.
Absolutely, Wanda.
Many years.
I know, so many years. We've taught each other. We've taught and supported each other.
Yes.
I'd like to add to what Wanda started talking about, because I thought it was important that I talk about how I grew up in the tribal community, because that was a foundation that really helped me to build my identity as an Indigenous woman. And knowing your identity, that strength that it brings you, that means that once you know who you are, once you love who you are, once you appreciate who you are, who your people are, you begin to understand your place in the world. And growing up in a tribal community, you know, it gives you this sense of place. It gives you a sense of your connectedness to everything, the land, the water, the animals, your family, the community. And that is a strength that helps you. It's like a shield as you go out into the big bad world. And so that really helped me, that fortified me as I made my journey to where I am now. And I just want to say that the work that we do to undo racism is not taught. I mean, the things that we're sharing, you know, I didn't learn this in school. I didn't learn this in college. Nobody told me this is the way to be. This is the, you know, some of the models that you can use. You know, we had to learn it by the seat of our pants. And so it takes courage. You have to really be courageous to embark on this journey, because it can be very, very painful. And without allies and support, you know, you'll throw up your hands in frustration, and you'll say, you know, I didn't ask for this. Why am I in this? Why am I doing this? I don't need to be here. And so you really need that support around you. You need to be able to dialogue, process what has just happened when you came out of that meeting. You know, and it blew up in your face. Who do I talk to? What happened here? And that's what Wanda and Roberto and Lucy and others, we share those experiences, and we say, well, I guess I could have done this instead. Yeah. But we need that support. We need that circle around us in order to do this work. And so, you know, I just encourage people to, to learn these lessons. I remember as I was moving into the Pueblo community when I first got married, and I didn't know the Pueblo ways and traditions, but my mother-in-law, she didn't sit me down and say, this is the way you do this. This is the way you make bread. This is the way you put it in the outside horno. She didn't tell me that, but what I had to do was I had to watch. I watched and I watched and I watched. And I didn't ask questions, and I didn't say, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I just watched and listened to their chatter and their talk. And then they, little by little, they started giving me more and more responsibility. And I started doing more of the things that my mother-in-law would do. And, and it was just like a passage, a transition, because all of a sudden, one day, others were looking to me to lead the way. Mm-hmm. It was a gradual thing that I didn't even notice, but I knew how to do these things. I had these skills, and I was able to take charge of, whatever task that needed to be done. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's happening here, I feel, mm-hmm. that we gather together, we circle together, we discuss together, we learn the lessons, and then we watch, and then all of a sudden we're going to be leading those groups, and we've had the experience and that we can do it. And so it just takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of help and support. And so that's as we get into the real nuts and bolts of how to do this work, that's the lesson that I want to put out there on the table first and foremost is, it's a journey, it's a process, and it's an exciting process, and I want you to be part of it.
Yeah, and
Nadine,
Roberto, I would love for you to pick up on that and also take it to what kinds of leadership we need as well in this. So,
I want to just tag on to what Nadine's saying. I want to add another thing that she mentioned earlier about decolonizing New Mexico, because I think the concept of decolonizing is very relevant in New Mexico as a place that's been multiply colonized. Mm-hmm. And so linguistically, it makes a difference versus just, it is about racism, and it is about cultural dominance, but it's also about how the legacy of colonization has played out and continues to play out here. And one of the aspects of that, in terms of leadership, if we're going to create and decolonize New Mexico, if we're going to eliminate racism, if we go to that model, it cannot be done without leadership. Mm-hmm. And it says like, so what's new about that? What's new about that is that people have a real naive view about diversity. People love New Mexico's diversity as if you don't have to take leadership to nourish it and strengthen it and eliminate the conflict within it. So you can't have actual inclusion and diversity if you don't have leaders who know how to guide it, facilitate it, mediate it, teach about it, etc. So so leadership, and I think of it as intercultural leadership, is absolutely indispensable. Mm-hmm. And in that vein, I think we need to quit training monocultural leaders. Mm-hmm. Monocultural leaders are not qualified to work in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. We've learned that over the time, because if you work from a dominant culture model, you don't necessarily understand the intercultural reality of New Mexico. So we have to reframe what leadership is and put our energies, especially nowadays, between climate change and a crumbling system, we don't have a whole lot of time. So we have to really focus on what critical intercultural leadership includes. And I have to say, as I'm saying this, I'm looking out at the screen, I see other allies, Shally and Nahum and Ray Leal and Maria, that I know personally. I just have to mention them because picking up on what Nadine said is that you can't do it alone. Mm-hmm. So how we connect cross-culturally and how we develop ally relationships that are based on trust, and that if the trust is broken at any level, we have the skill set to work out the differences. Mm-hmm. Because what we've learned in working together is that you've got to work it out. Mm-hmm. there's no way to not make mistakes. There's no way to not break the trust at some level. So the capacity and the skill set to not back off when the hard time comes, but to work it out is absolutely essential to working out in New Mexico. And underlying that understanding is another understanding that we've come to, is that when you colonize a place like New Mexico several times over, what you do is you institutionalize conflict. Mm-hmm. So like the theme of, of our talk, 500 years of resiliency is like, anytime one population colonizes another, you've institutionalized conflict. Mm-hmm. And then you have another colonizing power come and colonize on top of that. You've institutionalized another layer of conflict. So it's naive to think we can work it out without the conflict coming to the surface. Mm-hmm. And just to mention in that context, the Oñate issue at this point, because it's like what public art can do, depending on what it is, it basically triggers unhealed trauma. Mm-hmm. So the blow up is actually a favor to us who are interested in racial healing, because we get to see what it is that we want to heal. Mm-hmm. Okay, the problem is that there is not enough of skilled people who can intervene to sustain the healing. So what tends to happen, and certainly in New Mexico, is we go back to normal. Mm-hmm. It's either hide the statue or keep it, whatever we do, but let's drop the subject. Mm-hmm. So then it'll blow up again in 5 years or 10 years. We have to shift our long-term view, particularly in the context of increasing overt racism in the United States and climate change on top of that. There's a sense of urgency that we just really have to factor in.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Keep going on this, but I'll say that for now.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the pieces that you uplifted was that whole need for intercultural, cross-racial collectives and movement building that needs to happen in a way where conflict can arise. And I'd love Lucy to tell us what that has meant as a white woman working with people of color and the whole notion of allyship. It's problematic and it's a contested term that some people hate, because allyship sometimes means that you're not fully in, that this isn't your work as well, that you're just an ally and you can step away when you want, when in fact, none of us can, right? So what does that mean to you, Lucy?
Right. And I struggle with the terminology, and it feels as if vocabulary is changing under me, just like shifting sand. So, I mean, Roberto and I have done a lot of trainings on intercultural ally building, and that using that term freely. It's part of the hazards, I think, of doing the work is trying to hang on to those concepts and not get swept away by the kind of the splitting and the opportunities to divide people up. And I'm kind of concerned that that so much focus these days on identity and how to describe ourselves and describe others is pushing us apart rather than bringing us together. But I kind of think that might be another subject.
No, bring it, Lucy, because honestly, bring that too in, because I think that is very timely in this moment where people are becoming too politically correct to do the work, right? We've got to have some of the conflict that Roberto mentioned. I think it's, as a white person, I think it frightens us to find that we can't be using words we thought we could use. And it's been the case for a long time. Is it Native American? Is it Indian? Is it Hispanic? Is it Latino? Is it Latinx? Is it, I've had people tell me they prefer one or the other. There's no rule. And I think that after kind of driving myself crazy about that, I realized that the real underlying truth is that I'm going to make mistakes as a white person, as a human being. I'm going to just say the wrong thing. I'm going to do the wrong thing, and that's okay. At least I'm out there doing.
and learning from mistakes. So I think one of the really important lessons for white people is don't be afraid of making mistakes. We don't have the answers. Sometimes it feels as if those in the movement, in social justice out there in front, they've got the answers. We should have them. We need to be kind of the perfect white helper, the white ally. And that is just really going down the wrong path. That is not useful for ourselves nor for anybody else. So I think being willing to make those mistakes is really important. I also feel, and what I do for a living is mediate and facilitate. So for me, it's really important if I have in a group that is focused on a certain conflict and I'm trying to help them come up with a solution, that I give all the time and attention needed to the people of color in New Mexico to tell their story. Those stories, that history, that historical trauma, whatever it is that they're bringing, that knowledge, that connections of the land that Nadine was talking about, all of that, in my mind, as a mediator, as a dispute resolver, needs to be at the table. It needs to be part of the discussion. And there are those colleagues of mine who would say, no, you know, there are certain issues and you line up the issues and you work through them and you negotiate, and it has nothing to do with this kind of emotional, hysterical, kind of cultural sort of stuff. Keep that out. I totally disagree. It needs to be at the table in New Mexico or wherever I'm working for that matter. I think the other thing that I learned with some difficulty and kind of kicking and screaming was that it's my job to educate other white people, that it is absolutely not fair to expect people of color to educate over and over and over again white people, sometimes the same white people who are coming back for more, and in their very enthusiasm to learn about all of this cultural stuff and get all woke and get wise and everything, they're draining their allies, their people of color are just getting worn out and exhausted by that, by the very enthusiasm. And I can see Nadine nodding because
enthusiasm, Lucy, and on the flip side, sometimes it's the fragility, right? Where the space, everyone's, you know, trying to not make the next white person cry, right? And so there's that too, right?
Exactly.
Well, I certainly would like to speak to that when I can.
Wanda.
Yeah, I just think that a big part of my job is to help other white people deal with their own fragility and keep it to themselves, and let's just keep that out of this dialogue. But yeah, Wanda, please.
Yeah, and I've said this before when I was talking to you guys, my inner circle of other Black women, when I told them about this white fragility, we said, say what? Are you serious? What do you mean? The poor little white people, they can't stand the stress of talking about race. Oh, it makes them sad. It makes them uncomfortable. Boo-hoo. That was our reaction. Because what Van Zandt just got a new book out. And the name of the book is Bluntly, Get Over It. Now, the thing that I've learned, because I've studied so many different paths, another path I studied was Kabbalah, believe it or not, Jewish mysticism. In Kabbalah, it says comfort kills. If we're looking to be in a comfort zone, we will never grow. We all have to get out of our comfort zone. And I'm saying this to my white brothers and sisters whom I have grown to love. And if I can say that with sincerity, with all of my heart, it can happen to anyone based on my background. Get uncomfortable, but push through it. And stop. I did not like that term. You know, fragility. It sounded like, I can't even put the words, what my friend said. It was a expletive when I mentioned to her the discomfort with race. These white people have been insulated from any kind of talk of the discomfort of what's going on in the Black community, what's happening. And my husband and I, who is Hispanic, by the way, I married a native New Mexican. So I know a lot about this state. We've been married 24 years. I've been all over it, and I love this state. We travel, we see white people out having a good time. I mean, we go to places, resorts, and we both say they don't know anything about these racial issues. They don't even care. They're so insulated. But now, as you know, I've been to India, and I study planetary shifts and all of that stuff that people might call woo-woo. But I always say, don't poo-poo the woo-woo, because we are going through a planetary shift. And it's my cosmic responsibility to say stuff that's coming up is coming up for cleansing. It's all good, because it's been hidden for so long. And now we're at the point, it's now or never. And as I think Roberta talked about it a lot in climate change, Mother Earth is telling us we better get our act together. We either do it through choice or through trauma. We're really at that point in this country. We got to stop with the BS. We got to get real. So get uncomfortable. And my other teacher said, put your big boy pants on and let's get with it and get real. But and Lillian Robert Rose that we talked about, Roberta and I and Nadine, we all know her very well. And she got me on the path of the importance of my personal work. And then you do the internal work. And then as each person does that, then we're at the tipping point now, which is what I have hope. I believe that people are waking up. So it's just the point of the fragility that sets me off, that it sets me off.
No,
I'd like to make
all of you mentioned that internal work. Roberto, you want to add?
Well, I just a couple of points here. That one is an aspect of white fragility, since we're into this conversation, and to pick up on something that Lucy said about making mistakes, because you can't not make mistakes, and she spoke to that so well. But it's different. If you make a mistake within an ally relationship, you can work it out. And so the mistake actually becomes an opportunity for growth. It's like, don't do that again. Don't say that again. This is why. You know what I mean? The way it plays out in public, however, in our country, is like if you make a mistake, you become part of cancel culture, which actually just keeps polarizing people. But in all this, there's an aspect. So working that out is key, but there's an aspect of white fragility that I think has global and policy implications. One common reaction among many white people when you confront them about their racism is they become what I think of as the new victim. All of a sudden, I'm the real victim here, not you. Okay, the current administration has turned that phenomenon of white fragility into policy. And it's also, when you think of it globally, it's also a global problem. So there's a lot of implications to what we're talking about in terms of how do you work it out? How do you get clear on it? And if you have enough power, you could turn all of these characteristics of white fragility into racial dominance. And that's a lot of what's going on. So we really have to be sharp on this and deconstruct it because, again, and if you notice, there's a couple of things about the current government policy. One, it's victimology, but in favor of white people. And secondly, it's I forgot my second point. There's a good second point somewhere, but I forgot it. The policies that they deconstruct, the policies that they're eliminating. If you add it up, they're all policies geared toward fostering human community. You keep that in mind, because you destroy, through the EPA and so forth, you destroy the policies that used to bring people together, and then you frame that in a global victimology. So it's really horrendous what's going on, and it's related to what we're talking about.
I would just like to underscore a couple of things that were talked about. And a thing that I think is really important for folks to listen and think about is the fact that most people are really fearful of getting into conflict. And that's the thing that shuts down the conversation immediately, because people don't want to, rock the boat. They don't want to get other people mad at them. And so there's this fear of the conflict. And we can't be fearful of conflict. We have to be courageous and get into that conflict if we're gonna really make a difference. If you think of an iceberg, think in your mind of this iceberg. So there's this top part that you see, and everybody is hesitating and nice and saying, yeah, I understand you, and I want to hear you. But underneath that iceberg, there's all this other stuff going on below the iceberg, below the water edge. So we need to be good facilitators. We need to teach how to facilitate these kinds of conversations, because it is scary. It is, nobody teaches us how to do this. And so when you first get into a conflict with a group, it's like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Who opened this can of worms? And I don't want to do it. But believe me, once, as Wanda and Roberto said, with that strong allyship, it's worth it to get to that point where you can have these hard conversations and get through that conflict and make a whole different type of relationship, and that one that works and is strong.
And one of the things, Nadine, that you mentioned with that, being courageous, and how, sometimes you get those butterflies in your stomach if you're about to say something that you're not sure how it's going to be received. We're going to get to that now. We're actually going to open it up for people to ask you all questions. And I would love Nadine actually to start off with the first one that was in the chat that was brought to my attention by Lisa. And it's really about, is decolonization the same as anti-racism? What are your thoughts on that, Nadine, and then others if they want to add?
Well, for me, as an Indigenous woman, the whole thing about colonization, it hit us directly, our people directly, because there were in New Mexico, the Spaniards that came into New Mexico, but others who came into New Mexico and found indigenous peoples here, and immediately said, there's something wrong with you. You need to change your ways. And so immediately our way of life, our way of living was demeaned. And we were made to move into something that's very different, and our culture and our values and our practices had to go underground. And so colonization for me is very directly linked to our communities, our people, and that memory, that historical memory of what our people went through generation after generation to make changes in the way of life. So decolonization is beginning to dismantle that kind of thinking, beginning to say, native practice, native thought is as valid as any other thought and practice that we're teaching in the school system, for instance, or that we're using in our institutions. And so decolonization is about, it's systemic. It's ingrained, it's generational, it's both in the thinking and in the developing of systems that are put into place from then until now. And so what we do in the indigenous communities is we talk about our history. We talk about what happened at 500 years ago and where we are today. And we begin to not only list all the things that we've had to endure, but we list our strengths. How did we endure? What are those things we build on? We're still here. Our language, our culture is still intact. And so to me, that is my work on decolonization, is building a new model, dismantling the old and creating the new.
Great. And
yeah, Kiran, if I could just put a little footnote on that, particularly with the Oñate statue controversy and the view that the conquistadors were the colonists, which they were for sure. There have been other waves of colonists after the Spanish that are never talked about. I mean, all the white waves of traders and lawyers and realtors and developers and all kinds of people over the last couple hundred years that have come to New Mexico and colonized. And yet I think it's part of the white fragility, the white privilege dynamic that we don't have to be colonizers because we're white. So, you know, the Spanish were the colonizers and we just arrived and did our thing. So there's this really insidious kind of Teflon quality about that all of this doesn't stick on white people or they don't want it to. And I just, that's something that I care deeply about and really am trying to work one white person at a time to kind of just get real and be fair about this. I mean, you know, our role needs to be seen in that way and not through our own white eyes that see everything kind of, you know, we don't have a culture, we don't have to fall into any of those categories, but we have been colonists as well, colonizers.
Maria, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the importance of really acknowledging the genocide and not called it, you know, a cultural assimilation or whatever, because it was downright genocide. The policies that were that are in a lot of congressional documents is that we are we have no choice but to have this rule of the government or face extermination. And I read that myself in black and white. That was in the Senate in 1860. So there was deliberate attempts to wipe our people out.
Yes.
The only reason that didn't happen is because the Civil War was going on. And so that siphoned off some of the military. So then they went to other measures, but we were never intended to survive. And so that's really an important thing to recognize. So that's at the core of our experience.
I disrupt cash flow in the local family courts by doing advocacy and support for parents that require supervision for visitation. And I originally intended to just be helpful. And the size of the pushback that I got from the local administration caught me off guard. And I didn't realize that things were corrupt because there were financial incentives that were not present in the criminal and civil system because they're more developed and don't come with the shame factor of being part of a family that is disintegrating, as it were. So what I do is I help create legal documents and explanations and help to help these frazzled parents to be framed in such a way that they can navigate a court system.
I wanted to uplift some of the questions that are in the chat. So and the chat is kind of long now. So if we missed your question, we would love for you to bring it to the group and say it out loud. Unmute yourself and say your question out loud. There was one on youth or something, and it's
Dr. Straits has a great question about the younger generation.
Hi, thank you. First of all, this is really amazing. I so appreciate our panelists who are part of this, and you are deeply admired. I wanted to ask, because I see you all as elders of the anti-racism, decolonization, and anti-oppression work, and I would really love your perspectives on what you see with the younger generation taking up this work, maybe like unique barriers that they face, as well, that maybe I think there's different things happening in each generation and through time. And also just understanding what is it that you would want to pass on from the experience that you have to that younger generation taking up this work, And have you learned anything from them in seeing how they're approaching it?
I would like to start by sharing just a anecdote. I was listening to Native American Calling the other day, and Regis Pecos, who is a tribal leader from Cochiti Pueblo, was on that program. And he has founded a leadership institute at the Santa Fe Indian School, working with youth and helping them to understand history and politics and policy development. And some of the youth were able to talk about their passions and what they hope to work on as future leaders in their own communities. And I was just blown away. I was so impressed with these youth, not just high school, but college, young college folks who were moving on in their careers. And the thing that impressed me so much was the fact that this institute, this leadership institute, was not only talking about the systems that exist and that we have to be part of in everyday life, but they were also bringing in indigenous knowledge and practices and values. And so that these kids were getting a real strong foundation. And again, I can't emphasize enough, which was so important to me and my journey, was about self-identity and the strength in knowing who you are and where you come from, and how you can use this knowledge to benefit your people, your community, and use that voice as an advocate in an advocate way. So I think that was so hopeful to me, that this is going on, and it's going on all over the place, so that youth are getting involved. They want to be involved, and they're learning, they're getting the foundation that they need from various avenues. And that's exciting to me, that you know, these are going to be the next leaders. They're very articulate, they're very knowledgeable already, and it just makes me really hopeful.
Yes, and I'm very hopeful about the youth. Here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for an example, a woman by the name of Kathy Mcgill has been doing a youth leadership camp every summer since I've been here. I've been here about 20 years now. She's been doing it the last 8 or 9 years. I go to all of their events, and what I see these young people learning, what she's teaching them, I am so impressed with what's happening to our young people with the leadership skills. And she's doing it through the arts, through music, through dance, through creativity. And it's just, it warms my heart. And then I'm from Florida. I have a grandson who was near the school that Parkland, and just to see his strength. And he told me that, I asked him, how did he feel about what's going on there? He says, you know what, the kids are fine. The adults are driving us nuts. He actually said that, with all this stuff going on. He says, the kids are handling it. We're going to get through this. I said, that makes me feel better. So I see it happening all over the country, but particularly here in New Mexico, with the work that people like Kathy is doing. And I've been a part of her group as on her board for many, many years. And it just thrills my heart. We're going to be fine. The kids are fine. And we just need to continue to support them and to mentor them and to know that they're in good hands. With this planetary shift that's coming, I am totally hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to add, I don't think I could say more. I feel as Nadine and Wanda do about young people, and talk about hopefulness. I've worked over the years with Generation Justice and La Placita in the South Valley, and other organizations that where the young people involved, they're just so sharp on what's happening politically, and have done their work in terms of analyzing it and able to talk about it. It's just really it's uplifting. It's hard to describe how it feels to, because sometimes I think as an older person that these are things that used to be kind of, as you get older, you get some of this used to be stuff, I guess. when you read young people who just really are out there leading and articulating everything, it just blows your mind how great it is. So I just want to say that.
Beautiful. And, you know, I can't help myself. I know I'm supposed to be facilitating, but I've got to speak about some of the beautiful things that are going on regarding youth and really them addressing race and racism in our town and in our state. We're part of a collective called the Anti-Racist Youth Leadership Institute. And I'm telling you, so this is where nonprofits and community-based organizations who work with youth come together and they co-construct a curriculum with the youth. And then the youth over the summer get the experience of organizing with an anti-racist lens. And then they engage with each other, build relationships, and are able to mobilize more across the different nonprofits. So La Placita, SWAP, others are all part of it, as well as Together for Brothers, Families United for Education, so many. And what it does is it creates a space for the young people to see that it's all interconnected and it's tied to systems of oppression, but they themselves, so many of you mentioned, they're not receiving this in the schools, right? How to address what's going on in their city, in their state. And so they come up with ideas and they come up with ways that they want to transform New Mexico. And in the process, they also look at their own identity and their cultural ways of being and get grounded in who they are and what they bring to the world. So yeah, I love working with youth. So had to jump in with that one. Anyone else want to add?
I've taught college students for over 42 years. And the main thing, you know, kids need today is the truth. Okay. This pandemic is really terrible, but the technology is just amazing because you can, you know, with a license and everything, which my librarians figured out how to get for me. I showed them In the Light of Reverence, a movie that talks about the Hopis and the Wintu and the Lakota and how their sacred sites have been really appropriated by other cultures. And it's amazing to be able to take them to New Mexico, to Washington, to South Dakota, and they see it, you know, and then usually after the film, they're real quiet for about 3 minutes or so. They're kind of processing it. And they say, why is this happening? This has been happening. You know, look, chapter 2 of your book, look at it. What's it say? I said, yeah, that's exactly what it says. I said, well, now you saw it, you know, visually. What do you think about it? Well, got to change it. I said, well, you're the change agents. You know, my generation, we're at the end of our journey, but your journey is just beginning. And they're excited. You know, they're excited. I have faith in our youth. They're going to change the world.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, our job is to be, you know, spirit guides. That's it, you know. And by the way, I'm going to get a hold of a few of you to do a little Zoom lecture in my Indian class and my other class too, talking about African Americans and other groups, you know, Hispanos, you know, Latinx, whatever you want. You know, I'll just tell you, I'm an old kind of Mexican. That's it. You know, that's what we were when they took over the Southwest. For those of you who don't know me, Roberto knows me. I got a place up in Chama. And it took the people there about 2 years to get to know me because I was from Texas. So obviously I was a white devil, except, you know, I didn't have a white devil name. I didn't look like a white devil. I spoke Spanish. They're like, who is this guy?
Talk about a peacemaking initiative just to get him accepted. There was a lot of work.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, I'm good friends now with the Hickory. I've always been very close to the Isleta people. Verna Olguin Williamson, her mother taught me a great deal about how to find my own way. You know, she was a clan mother. She was amazing. And, you know, she taught me one very important lesson about life. You don't need a college degree or a law degree or a PhD or any kind of D. to know what's going on in the world. You know, I learned more from her than I did from any professor I ever had in my life. And, you know, I was one of those kids that asked a lot of questions when I was little. My mother said, "Oh, I think we're gonna have to worry about this one." My dad said, "Nah, just turn him loose." Just turn him loose. It's really been wonderful hearing you all talk and share your thoughts. I think you're right on the money. The fight's long from over. We got to keep going. Me and my colleagues are doing what we can to help you in Albuquerque with that police department.
Nice.
I can give Renee the place you can go and actually read the reports if you want some heavy reading, and some of it deals with mental health. I actually went out on a ride along one night with one of their police officers who was half Mexican and half white, spoke Spanish, and we were in a couple of crisis situations. He handled them very well. I also sent Roberto a video clip of HBO did a documentary. It's a mental health unit in the San Antonio Police Department. They're called crisis cops. They don't wear uniforms. They wear civilian clothes and they put their badge on their belt, and they go around and prevent suicides and deal with mental health cases the way they should be dealt with, not with a gun.
Raymond, we're coming to a place where we want to leave people with suggestions of what can be done. You gave some just now with the young people and, you know, how we can engage them with already existing projects, programs, and people. Ariana and Justina were asking in the chat as well, what are the current leveraging points for moving us forward and for a more humane society? So what this takes us to is, and this is so much about these four panelists being people of hope, right? They have been able to stay in this very hard work because they have hope. And so we should leave people with stories of ways in which they've seen racism undone and how they've seen hopeful ways of moving forward, leverage points and others. So Nadine, Wanda, Lucy, Roberto, if you have any stories of hopefulness and what has happened in our beautiful state that has given you more hope, and then we'll ask the audience to give stories as well. So if you want to add.
Yeah, I would love to start. I wanted to be sure that this group, especially those in the Albuquerque area, knew about the mayor's Race, History, and Healing project. I'm one of 12 facilitators that are facilitating a series of community conversations about race, history, and healing. The project was triggered, of course, by the Oñate statue controversy, but the process itself that the city has set up starts not with conflict over the statue, but with bringing people together, strangers in Albuquerque, bringing them together and having them exchange stories about their own identity, about their own histories, developing some relationship and some trust among people. And then later they will begin to address questions about public art, how decisions should be made, how to value everybody's feelings, etc. So the facilitating these sessions has been really incredibly moving, and I've just been so impressed with people's willingness to tell their stories. And there have been a few young people that have participated, and I would love to see more. So if there's any way anybody could spread the word, because when there is a young voice in that group of 15 on the Zoom screen, there is great power there, and everybody else is listening to what that young person has to say. And my experience is, as we've already heard, that there's great hope there, great energy, a kind of a tolerance and an openness that I don't feel among a lot of people my age. And I'm just incredibly hopeful and would love to see more youth participating in this. So you go to the City of Albuquerque website and you can easily sign up and participate. It's open to everybody. So I just wanted to be sure to get that plug in, and it's a hopeful one.
I would also like to give a shout out and plug for Dr. Key Straits and the group, that the training that her friends and colleagues are putting forth on cultural humility. And those trainers, you know, as we've been having these dialogues with various folks who are doing the work, we're trying to connect to each other to say, what part of anti-racism, decolonization, oppression work are you part of? And so we're trying to put a group together so we can at least have conversations, dialogues, share lessons learned. And so I would like to just maybe Dr. Straits, Key, you have, you can say a few words about the cultural humility training that's going on. It's really very effective and needed at this time. She may have left.
Well, if she doesn't come back, I would like to suggest one of the tools that I use personally, and I taught it, and the genesis is Lillian Robel Rose again, where we learn reevaluation counseling, and because I believe the work starts within. You start within, and then it'll show without. This changed my life, the life of my husband. I've been married 24 years. He's Hispanic, and we both had similar challenges, but through RC and being able to discharge the anger, the resentment, it was so cleansing. It's like a spiritual shower that we got. And it enabled me and him to be together in peace and love in this state. And we have rural property here in New Mexico. And when I go out there, I feel so welcome and at home, because those people know I respect them, the people that live there, and there's love there. They were suspicious at first, but they got to know me. And Lillian taught us the whole thing about cultural competency and to be authentic, to be real. And so I'm a proponent of doing your personal work. And my 3 things I like to leave with people: study. Study who you are. Learn to love yourself, number 1. Pray. Prayer is a feeling. It's not just words, because you get that feeling of prayer. You get love in your heart, and people feel it. And meditate. I'm a big fan of the Eastern Indian mystics, and I've been a meditator for years, and it works. Start within, and it will show. And we're at the tipping point, and we're getting there. And I'm so hopeful. But cultural competency starts with your inner work, and then it'll show.
Yeah, and this is Maria. I just wanted to add, sort of along those lines, that when we first started the historical trauma work years and years ago, we focused on healing ourselves, healing of the healers, training of the trainers model, because our hearts were heavy and really wanting to do things for our people, but we realized that we needed to look at our own stuff. And that fits with some behavioral health traditions, like, and a lot of people have distortions about it, but a lot of the early psychoanalytic folks were actually very much aware of politics and oppression, because a lot of those folks were, there were a lot of Jewish people that were sort of in the early days, and they're very aware of oppression and genocide. And actually, my first session with my training analyst, who happened to be Jewish, and this is when I was in New York going through training, the first thing I started complaining about was, racism and oppression of American Indians. And he said, well, that's genocide. And I could have gotten up and kissed him, because he got it. So that's something that I think is really important, is that for us to, so it's kind of healing of the healers, for us to do the work. And we'll get triggered. You'll get triggered constantly, because you still have things you're working on. And because there's things that that you're helpless about. And so, so that's just one of the things that I also think it's important to do. And Nadine's we've been in a lot of different things together. And so that's a lot of the work that we do. And it's really helpful because we need support. People who are helping other people, we get depleted, and to do our best, we also need that community and that help.
Roberto and Lucy, you wanna?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, yeah, I just, one thing in the vein that we're talking about is even during the pandemic, I continue to get a lot of calls, and I think from various organizations or persons that have kind of a new awareness about what's going on now, and they really want to know more and understand better what's happening. And I think there's been an increase in that, at least based on limited recent experience. And I find also that when you really get into working on these issues with organizations, with people, they're quick to see the excitement of the learning and the self-transformation that they get from taking on this issue. That it's really, instead of becoming a burden and an ongoing conflict, it's really about personal growth. And you get to grow in a way that you wouldn't otherwise if you didn't really have the courage to look at yourself, look at your issues, and from any side of the equation, you know, whether you're on the oppressor side or the victim side, liberating oneself from those conditioned roles is really exciting to people once you can introduce them into that possibility. So I take a lot of hope from that.
Yeah, I agree, Roberto. I'm just really impressed that all kinds of terms like systemic racism and white privilege that we've been training on for decades and trying to kind of get through to people, those words are now just rolling off people's tongues and are an accepted fact for a lot of people. And I think that's really hopeful. And I think you're right, Roberto. It's a sign of a kind of excitement about, wow, there's something here to figure out. And how great is that going to be when we get it figured out? So I'm really happy to be in this field at this time because it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Dominique, I think there was someone that put in the chat that might want to share if people didn't get to read the chat.
Oh, yes, I just saw your message actually. So what I shared in my chat is that, so I'm 29 and I was born and raised here in Las Cruces. And, you know, I really never witnessed racism when I was a child. I mean, I was, you know, friends with everybody, you know, my parents, you know, we never discussed any of that. But I learned through history, of course, through classes from the older generation and ancestors. But, you know, I think what confused me even more was with 9/11 because I didn't understand what was going on. I was even scared because I just didn't understand like what happened, you know, and until I get older, then, you know, I start learning even more about history and how racism, inequity, and all of it still exists. So, you know, I always believe in equity, but then again, it's still, you know, there's still a lot of social justice and inequity that still needs to be, I guess you could say, solved or, you know, but I decided, I got my undergrad in public health, and then I went on to the social work getting at New Mexico State University for my graduates. And it was more of an eye-opening learning about like cultural humility and other things that are still just occurring in today's society. And, you know, with me, part Hispanic and native from the Tiwa, it's just like, wow, this actually, a lot of this still exists. So, and I appreciate learning from the panels just even more. So thank you.
Thank you. And it kind of uplifts the fact that just imagine if all our young ones from a very young age were given the access and opportunity to truly understand their history, each other's history, American history, right? It's not about any one of us learning just about our own history. We've got to learn each other's history and what this country could look like if that were to happen. So yeah, thank you, Dominique. And it's very true. I want to pass it over to Lisa so that she can bring us to a close today. And I want to thank our panelists and all the wonderful people that have stayed on. It is true that this conversation not only needs to be had, but we need to do it together, and we need to help each other figure out what needs to happen next. And it's been beautiful just to listen to you all and to learn. Bless you. Lisa?
Just gratitude. So much gratitude for this time, for our elders, for the wisdom, for the young person who just spoke, Dominique. Lots to think about. And they say the greatest freedom is the freedom in the mind. And I just want to end as we all look at each other. If you guys would turn on your cameras, if you feel like you can. And this one is for Wanda and Nadine. A couple years ago, we went to Meow Wolf. And we went into the Crystal Bowl singing room. And we were so exasperated by all the activity with the rest of the building that it was so nice to sit in there. And I think life is kind of like that lately. And COVID-19 globally in some ways has connected us in a different way. We long for each other. We long to be in conversation. And then the suppression of voice and the letter that just came out this week from Trump, that these kind of conversations are un-American. Well, these kind of conversations is the liberation and the critical thinking we need. So I just want to give appreciation and gratitude for this moment, for this food for our soul and for our collective well-being. And so look at each other and we'll end in silence. Carlos, thank you so much. Alicia, you guys have been behind the scenes with me, really working hard to make tonight work. They're still at the office. And Kiran, and many of you, but mainly for Nadine, Wanda, Roberto, and Lucy, for the many, many years. May so many blessings keep coming right back at you. So let's look at each other and look through all the boxes. And this one is just to end with the vibration of the sacral chakra. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.